So this is where we've gotten to. We've got the secondary coil built and it's sitting on sort of wooden platform, and I've got, it's a bit hard to see because it's rather fine, the top of the coil is coming out of here. So the next project is to build a capacitive hat that will sit around up here, which will resonate with this inductor. And the first thing I'm going to do is that this is one of the 1.25 inch PVC end caps that was in the little rotator that we used to put the wire on the coil, and it's got a little hole in the middle. So I'm going to thread the wire through that and then sit the cap back on top here. And I want this to be conductive so that I can try a variety of different capacitive hats on it. So once I've fed the wire through, I'm going to use a little piece of sandpaper again to expose the end of part of the wire. And then I'm going to cover the cap in this aluminum duct tape. Now I've used this on a variety of projects like this in the past, and despite the fact that it has glue on the back of it, when you stick it down and then burnish it over nicely, perhaps with the back of a spoon or something like that, you get a pretty good conducting surface. So the first thing to do is to cut some strips of this. It's a little fiddly to deal with because being sticky and a bit stiff, it tends to stick to the scissors. But we're going to wrap some around this, try and cover the top first and then wrap some around the outside, and I'll burnish that down. And then we're going to get the wire through there and use another piece to just tape the wire down to the top, and then we'll work on the hat. Now the hat I'm going to try to make is actually, I put this together the other day just to see what it would look like. It's a little heavy. This is 4 1.25 inch PVC elbows that I happen to have. You know, everybody keeps stuff like this in their house, I'm sure. Mine was from an outdoor project actually, which is how I come to have this 1.25 inch tube as well. So I cut 4 short bits of tube here just to connect these together, and I haven't glued this together. I've just pushed them together just to see what it would feel like. It's a bit heavy, but I think it'll work. Now I want this to sit on top of the whole thing up here on top of this cap. So the important thing is, does it fit through the hole? Well, it does, and there's a bit of a gap there, which is fine. So what I think we're going to do with this is I'm going to pad the inside of this possibly with some of the rubber electrical tape or something like that, just to change the diameter slightly. And I'm going to cut a piece of wood to go in the top here, or a piece of plastic maybe, and then tape that down in here so that when I want to use this, I can just sit it on top and it will just sit snugly on top of the cap. Now the cap's going to have this aluminum tape around it so it'll be conductive, and what we're going to do with this is cover this all in aluminum tape. Now the nice thing about the shape of this is that when it's sitting on the top of the coil, and it'll be sitting like this, on the bottom side we have a nice round surface, no sharp points, because if we have sharp points anywhere on this, they'll be points of very high field intensity and we'll get lots of radiation from there. Now we do actually want some of that at some point, but we'll make those when we want them. Ideally this wants to be very nice and smooth, so I'm going to fiddle around with that a little bit later, but to start with we're going to try and make this cap. Now when you cut this, ideally we don't want any sharp edges, but you know, we're living in a world of sharp edges here. And I'm just going to try and put a piece on the top to start with. I once made the top of a Van de Graaff generator out of this stuff, and the sphere I put it on was about, oh, I don't know, 18 inches in diameter. It's an awful lot of tape. And it was very difficult to get it to look smooth on the top, but it can be done. So just stick that down. That's not awful. Now, we don't have to get this perfect because this thing here is going to be sitting on top of it, so it's not actually going to matter whether this is spiky, but I'm just going to go find something to burnish this with. So this is my favourite burnishing tool, so we just take the spoon and rub the ridges down until they're reasonably flat. Oh, I did mean to mention that if you really want the surface to be smooth, as we do for the hat later, you really need to take a file to the plastic moulding so that there aren't any of the moulded letters, bumps and bits and pieces on it. So again, this is going to be up inside the hat, so I'm not terribly worried about how well this comes out. So I've got that on there. And again, take the spoon to it. Okay, so I think that'll do for our conductive top cap. So I'm just going to poke the hole back in the top so we can get our wire through it. Carefully. And feed that through the hole. So I just take a little piece of sandpaper and pinch over the wire and pull until you see the insulation comes off. I'm just going to tape that to the top. So one of the things about doing this is that I'm doing this live, as is fairly obvious. I haven't done this before on this particular shape, so I have no idea how this is going to turn out. So mostly what we do is we just have a go at it and see how things turn out. Built 3 different Van de Graaff generators in the past. One quite large one that was big enough to light up fluorescent tubes from 10-15 feet away in my workshop where I lived in Colorado. Colorado being ideal for this kind of work because of the incredibly dry atmosphere. I actually lived not too far from where Nikola Tesla actually did his work. Right, so I've done the bottom part here, and doesn't look too bad. That's what it's going to look like underneath. I haven't finished doing the top side yet because now I'm going to cut something to go in here and glue that in there, and then I'll finish up taping the rest of the top. I think we're on the way. It's probably good enough for version 1. So I got a bit carried away putting the aluminum tape on the first time, and I actually forgot that I needed to bung up the hole in the middle a little bit, make it a bit smaller, so that this will be a snug fit in there. So I took some of this self-amalgamating rubber electrical tape, I cut some strips and put them around the inside of the hole. So now I gotta just re-tape a few little bits here, cover that with the aluminum foil so that it'll connect to the top cap when we put it on there. So I cut a little piece of wood to go in the top and tapered it a little bit with the sander so that it's gonna sit down. Well, I think it'll sit down about flush with the top, and that'll be our hat. So I'm gonna cut up lots more bits of tape and stick that on there. So that's the hat made with its little wooden inside. And that's what it's going to look like sitting on top of the secondary coil. So I'm pretty keen to build some electronics and get this thing excited.